Most of us are very good at surviving. We push through, we cope, we hold it together. But survival is exhausting. And at some point, the question really becomes not how do I get through this, but actually how do I live well while I'm in this? Today's conversation is exactly about that shift from the short term survival to long term thriving in the process. Welcome back to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. Another day, another episode where we explore practical ways to support mental health, resilience, and a very sustainable approach to well being. Today, I'm joined by Suzanne Rath, an endurance athlete, physiotherapist, health coach, and creator of the NDOS framework. Suzanne's work brings together lived experience, clinical insight, and real world resilience, especially after a recovery from a life threatening bike accident and traumatic brain injury. In this episode, we're going to be exploring how the framework actually works and supports recovery, adaptability, long term thriving, you name it. But hey, here we are, Suzanne, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Likewise, Suzanne. So, before we get into the how aspect of things, and about the endurance framework itself, I'm curious as to was there a moment in your life where you realized that you're just running on a survival mode? So, like surviving, not living.
There's been a couple of those moments. So one is the classic kind of had a big accident. So living in Sydney 12 years ago, I was hit by a car. And essentially, my life changed in seconds. I thought I just had fractures, like I had multiple fractures in my jaw. And I thought, okay, well, bones heal, everything will be fine. But essentially, I had a period of a couple of years where I had this constant pain, this fatigue, and concentration issues. I had to give up two of my three jobs. And so, really, there was a series of moments at that time that I just felt like I was a shell of my former self. And, I think it's with hindsight, I look back at the things that work and, the strategies that I put in place, how I had to really be kind to myself with how I would plan every day and put together this team of people around me. But um, it's hard to pick one particular moment from that.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel that. It definitely do becomes, a kind of a stagnated feeling is what you're describing in that point in your life. And honestly, I think we're not just limited to those kind of moments, right? I see people around me having a job, going to a job, right? And they come back and I mean, that's just it. And they just have their personal life as well. But, like not finding the purpose in their actions in their life, I think. So we'll come to that in a moment, but so I just want to talk about one of the common misconception around how people equate resilience with just pushing harder or being tougher. So I'm curious as to what you think most people misunderstand the most about resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely build resilience from hard things, and we can sort of build presilience where we can become more resilient intentionally through building resilience in our bodies and through building resilience in our minds. But essentially, lots of people think it's just about this endless pushing through or that we have to have these big sort of traumas like what I had with the accident. But really, it's about resourcefulness. So it's how do we put in place that space to have resilience because we need the space to think and to recover and to, reflect on what's happened and to grow. That's the space that resilience is born out of.
Hmm. Right. Uh, that distinction, I believe, really matters for me because it sounds like, resilience as an ability that makes you bounce back from any kind of situation in your life, right? So it's being that elastic rubber ball that just
Yeah.
bounces no matter what surface it hits. It's just quickly what you call elastic, right, in nature. So it's about, I believe, developing that perspective mentally so that it becomes less about grinding through prayer and more about responding intelligently to what life is asking of us. So, Suzanne, if we stay that for a moment, because you are also a physiotherapist and a coach, so you would, or you might have come across so many people in your work that or who get stuck in survival mode in the first place. So, one thing that happens now, I just want to put a very interesting um, perspective to this. I recently read a study that said that time appears to be moving faster when you are living in the survival mode. What I mean by that is, visiting the same places in your life, not exploring something new. I went to this cafe, or maybe I went to some other good place, or maybe I met a couple of new friends, I mean people, and I made new friends. So when that element disappears from somebody's life, time is a factor that feels very stagnated. So I'm curious to know what's your view on that, and also the previous question, which remains, that why do you think so many people get stuck in survival mode in the first place? So is there any correlation between that and my perspective is what I really want to hear from you.
I think that's really interesting. So yes, 100% there is a correlation. It's so multifactorial, right? Like um time is moving very quickly, right? And we're in an age where we are exposed to more change than ever before, but also less than ever again.
Hmm.
And we have all these things that are designed to help us, inverted commas, like our AI and our endless scroll and our Google chat and all of these things, but they're just these constant distractions. And so
Yeah.
I think many people get stuck in that reactivity. So they get stuck in constantly responding rather than being proactive and, intentionally planning their lives. When I look back at my life and my work, so I don't treat clinically anymore, but I still run the clinical business. And my sort of leadership work really sits at the intersection of leadership, high performance, health strategy, etc. Um,
Wonderful.
my sort of through line is wanting people to achieve their full potential. And I think often people are held back by society. So I know for me, after the accident, I was given a diagnosis of adjustment disorder, which is failing to adapt to the new normal. But I didn't want to adapt to the new normal because I believed that I could get to where I'd been and, better.
Yeah.
Um, so I think if I'd accepted that diagnosis and been put in that box, and, so many people, I think they're so busy listening to, what their employees say or their parents say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because if you ask me, if you think about it, time was moving differently as a child, right? And that is because you as a child are discovering new things, right, in your everyday life, and it becomes interesting because if you apply the same analogy to your adult self as well, right, that's when I think you flip the switch from being in survival mode to the thriving mode because you're
Mm,
now discovering new things. So that's something that I believe goes well from what I've experienced. But I was curious to ask you the same, so I did. But back to if we come back to the script now. Uh, uh, so when someone is living in that say short-term survival instead of long-term thriving, like we're talking about, could you tell us what are some of the day-to-day symptoms, maybe? Like, what do you see in their bodies, work, relationship, mindset, the way they talk to you, and so forth and so on?
so something I hear from people is they feel like they're in Groundhog Day, or, they're just waiting. It's never the right time. It's never the right time for a holiday. It's never the right time to do something new. Maybe they don't have hobbies, like their hobby and their whole identity lives around their business or their leadership. Um, so I guess the three things I'm really passionate about in terms of outcomes are this focus, momentum, and potential. And so people with no focus, you spend your time just jumping from one thing to the next, where, our focus is something like less than a minute if we don't train it. And so, of course, you finish your day just feeling frazzled. You think, well, what did I achieve today? I had a day similar to that yesterday, right? And I have strategies where I reset quite regularly and I reflect on what I've done. And so I can pull it back together. But it's very easy to get caught into that loop of just reacting to everyone's demands in work. Um, the second one is momentum, and that is when people just they can't move in the direction that actually matters. So they're sort of moving in a million different directions. And of course, they're not actually going forwards, right? And that can be in their personal lives or in their work lives. And then the third one is just this potential. And sometimes that's people actually don't know themselves. So they're setting goals because they feel good or they look good on paper or someone thinks they're good. Um, and sometimes it's just that they don't have the courage or the capacity or the tools to just self actualize, right? Like they're so busy trying to please everyone, then yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those three things I believe are very relatable to whosoever is listening to this, because I think I could relate my younger self to whatever things you just talked about. And Suzanne, what stands out to me is how subtle this can be. Like, on the outside, people might look good on paper, is what you talked about as well, even successful, but internally they're constantly almost racing, right, on in certain aspects. And I think this is when this is exactly why we should talk about the framework that you bring along into this. So, could you maybe give us a brief about what the framework is about? Before diving into the jargon or stuff like that, how does this framework help someone move from coping to actually evolving, I should say, or rebuilding capacity for health, adaptability, and growth?
Yeah, so essentially it's designed around self-leadership. So for teams, in my keynote, I touch on three aspects of it, which are how we set a vision, which is, it's important to connect to your company's vision or your workplace's vision so you can actually generate that sense of purpose. And, I believe that purpose is a practice, right? Like we don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm so motivated. I'm going to achieve my purpose, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it's a constant practice. How to get there, so how to delete all the noise and, drive through hard things. But the most important part, um, and I mean, it's all important, but the part that for me, when I've been a high performer, but I've not been a sustainable high performer, so either when I've been recovering from my accident or recovering from burnout, is the recovery. And, sometimes we think of recovery as like a big holiday or a spa day, but recovery is these little intentional pauses we put in throughout the day, like the micro breaks and, the turning off our devices and turning off all of the tabs and how we focus, right, on the one thing. All of those little tools and techniques and habits are just so essential for protecting our mental bandwidth and actually being able to get the most out of our lives.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. And if I may ask you, Susan, what is that? You maybe perhaps focus on using these micro breaks that you said. So would that be just switching off all of your devices and sitting by yourself in whatever place you find comfort in that point, or something else that you do that you guys you would like?
So I actually have on my window in front of me, I have like a little micro break ideas thing. And now I will put them into my plan for the day. So it might be just like a non-sleep deep rest or patting the dog or going outside or, they can be the research on just even a 5-minute break. You don't need to switch off your computer, but stepping away from it. And I've even seen some research that looking at nature scenes on your computer. So if you work in a city and you can't get outside in the grass or, you're in a busy office environment, just trying to delete some of the noise and looking at, a YouTube video of whale sharks or something,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
can just change that brain state. But
Mm.
I encourage people to do the same. Like I call it a recovery menu, to actually plan what you're going to do with those times. Cause it's really easy to say, oh, today I'm going to do like 10 minutes of yoga. I'm going to close my eyes and take 10 deep breaths. But I think we all get into the habit as busy people of going, oh, it's lunchtime now. I'm just going to check my emails, or I'll just book those flights, or yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I have heard a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners talk about these micro breaks as well. Like, and if you ask me particularly, I like to you know because I'm into music as well. I just like to sit by the window maybe, or play something that suits me out. But for
Yeah.
someone, it could be just watching outside of the window, whatever view that might be.
Y-
Yeah, and finding those little things to observe too, right? I think that really uh, connects us to our true selves, by understanding how nature works itself. So I think that's a very practical and also very beautiful approach to reconnect to yourself and find purpose in your life. Although it might sound very trivial, and someone might disagree, but I've seen a lot of people talk about this. So maybe we can save that for some other conversation today, right?
And the sell for me, like to make it not trivial, it actually increases your productivity by at least
Yeah,
30%.
I mean
So,
that's facts.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you were saying something. Sorry.
No, so I mean that like even you saying you play music, like that's changing your brain state. So we need to be able to shift between brain states. This is why things like meditation are so powerful, but not everyone likes to meditate. So
True.
that designing a recovery menu, there's a way that everybody can find their little 5 minutes of shifting state.
Absolutely. And I believe that is very important in today's fast-paced lives that we have, made for ourselves. So, if I have to make this even more practical and more relatable to everyone who's listening to this, so even with the right framework, Suzanne, I mean, because how unpredictable and non-linear life really is. I mean, setbacks still happen, right? So what tends to help people stay engaged with long-term thriving when uh, life throws these little stones back at them, causing uncertainty and self-doubt within themselves? What do you suggest?
I mean, I think the key, if there's a lot of keys, but having a support group and actually having a support group who are real support. There's a really great book by Janine Garner called 12 Key People, and she talks about intentionally, and this is going to sound very contrived, but
Mm.
intentionally boxing people into where they fit in their support group, right? So, say, for example, your parents might give you a lot of love, but if you go to them saying you're going to run a marathon or you're going to set up a business, they might say, oh, don't do that. That's going to fail, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because they're trying to protect you, but you're not going to go to them if you want courage. And so it's intentionally picking like who's going to be your cheerleader, who is going to be your accountability buddy. So instead of saying, oh, you're tired, well, just, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Just give it up. They're going to say, no, you've committed to this. So when are you going to come back and tell me that it's done? Right. And so that support systems really is the foundation of all of my work. And it's the environment I want to provide for my clients through, being that one-on-one ear, but also
Mm.
through my online program.
Mm.
And, there's so many other things that are difficult to do in the moment, but a really essential practice to get into. So, like, how do we connect back to our vision? How do we connect back to our values? How do we become adaptable? Like, there's a thing called the adaptability quotient now. I don't know if you've heard about it, but adaptability is like the superpower of now, right? So we've got emotional intelligence and IQ, and now we've got this adaptability quotient as well. So, yeah.
Wow, that sounds interesting. No, I actually haven't. I just have in fact heard about the emotional intelligence like as well. Could you maybe sum it up of what that is, perhaps, so we get more idea, or we could understand the nuance of it?
Yeah, so there's 7 major barriers to accountability. And so you can kind of self-rate how you go on these barriers, or you can look up obviously different account
Mm.
adaptability measures, right? But adaptability quotient is, how flexible and, how responsive are you to change, right? And as I mentioned, we are living at a time of great change, and we're also living in a time where we're exposed to more visual stimuli in a day than people were in their whole lives in the 50s. So we have to be able to shift focus and, adapt to demands and so on, while leaving that space for resourcefulness and resilience. Um, with adaptability, probably the most common thing I have heard from teams that I've worked with is actually this fear of looking incompetent. And I think if we think of change, if we can provide these workplaces and foster these workplaces where it's okay to share mistakes, or where we as leaders can be vulnerable, then, ideally we can then help our teams to then try things. Because so many leaders are like, my teams aren't, they don't take initiative, they don't try things. Why don't they try things, right? But I do wonder how much it comes back to that fear of looking incompetent. So it's certainly something we can foster within our teams.
Beautiful. I love the way how you framed it, because eventually, I think it all comes down to the person who should be accountable for uplifting you in that moment, when you're low. And like you said, I believe, be it support group, or be it some individual, or be it your parents. I mean, they play a huge role in our part, in our lives. I mean, right, at some part or some point in our life. And like you said, Suzanne, that's interesting. I mean, and I agree with that. Like, uh, the kind of visual stimuli that we are basically going through in a day is what people back in 50s used to have their whole lives, right? And I think that is why it's so important to find those moments in between. And if there is anything to take away from this conversation, folks, it's this: that if there is one thing to that you should uh, maybe kind of remember from this conversation, is that thriving is not about doing more or
Mm.
pushing harder. It's about building that capacity to live well for the long run. Now, it could mean music to me. I mean, finding those moments where, I get the time to maybe reconnect to myself via music. It could be nature for you, right? So it's you who gets to who should decide what those pauses should look like for your daily life. And before we hit, I mean, since we're hitting the minute mark already, Susan, for listeners who want to learn more about your work or the NDOS framework in general, where can they find you at?
Yeah, so my website, suzannerath.com.au, has the framework. It's also got a number of free resources, including a webinar to design a recovery menu, which we spoke about. So definitely hop onto that. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn, Substack, YouTube, Instagram.
Perfect, perfect. I'll include the details in the show notes for the listeners so they can find you easily from the links below. And with that, folks, thank you for joining us on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. And if today's conversation, if there were some parts of it that resonated with you, maybe the whole of it, I want you to take a moment to reflect on where you might be surviving, right, instead of thriving. And yeah, I think you deserve more than endurance alone. So, until next time, please do take care of your mind, your body, and I'll see you in the next one.